The debate over Social Security cost of living adjustments is no longer just about one annual percentage number. It is about whether retirees are being protected from a slow but serious erosion in their standard of living. The Senior Citizens League has been pressing lawmakers to change the way annual COLAs are calculated, arguing that the increases retirees receive have repeatedly failed to keep pace with the real inflation pressure seniors feel in everyday life. What stands out is the scale of the concern. Over the last 10 to 15 years, beneficiaries have seen a meaningful loss of buying power, and a different formula could potentially make a major difference, with one estimate showing that a change could add more than $12,000 in lifetime Social Security benefits for an average worker who stopped working and began claiming benefits in 2024. The key detail is how the adjustment is currently measured. Social Security relies on the Consumer Price Index for urban wage earners and clerical workers, commonly known as CPI-W. This index tracks inflation for households whose income mainly comes from hourly wage employment or clerical work, and it represents about 30% of the United States population. Because of the type of spending it measures, CPI-W gives strong weight to categories such as transportation, gasoline, commuting costs, and apparel. That matters because when oil and gas prices rise sharply, CPI-W can move higher than another senior-focused measure, which means in a year with a spike in gasoline and oil prices, CPI-W may actually produce a better result for beneficiaries than the alternative index being discussed. Here's where it gets interesting. The Senior Citizens League is also calling attention to the Consumer Price Index for the Elderly, or CPI-E, an experimental index created to better reflect the spending patterns of Americans aged 62 and older. CPI-E is designed around the reality that older Americans generally spend more of their budgets on healthcare, prescription drugs, housing, and insurance, while spending less on gasoline, commuting, and work clothing. That difference in spending patterns is exactly why advocates argue CPI-E may be a better fit for Social Security recipients than CPI-W. Although CPI-W can be higher in certain periods, especially when transportation and fuel costs are rising fast, the longer-term data tell a different story. Looking at information dating back to 1985, CPI-E has been slightly higher than CPI-W in most years, even though there have also been years when CPI-W came out ahead. When averaged over time, CPI-E has typically run about 0.2 percentage points higher per year. That may sound small at first, but for Social Security benefits, even a fraction of a percentage point can matter because the increase becomes part of the benefit amount going forward. To make the impact clearer, consider a retiree receiving $2,000 a month. Under a 2.8% COLA, that monthly benefit would rise to $2,056. But if the COLA were 3% because CPI-E added another 0.2 percentage points, the same benefit would rise to $2,060 a month. At first glance, the difference is only $4 per month or $48 over a year, and that may not sound dramatic. But the point is not just 1 year. Over decades of retirement, those small differences build on each other, and because future COLAs are applied to a larger base benefit, the gap can compound into a much larger amount of money. This is why the Senior Citizens League is not only focusing on which inflation index should be used, but also on whether retirees should have a stronger protection floor built into the system. Another proposal from the group would calculate the annual COLA by using CPI-W, CPI-E, or 3%, whichever figure is highest. In practical terms, if CPI-W came in at 1% and CPI-E came in at 1.2%, beneficiaries would not be limited to either of those lower figures. They would instead receive a guaranteed minimum 3% increase. If inflation were higher than 3%, then the formula would use whichever inflation measure, CPI-W or CPI-E, produced the larger result. Now notice this. Under that approach, years with very low inflation or no measured inflation would still produce an increase for Social Security recipients. In years like the period around the 2008 financial crisis, when inflation was measured at 0% and no cost of living adjustment was handed out, retirees would still have received a 3% COLA under the proposed minimum. The purpose is to reduce the long-term damage caused when benefits fail to rise, even though seniors continue facing higher costs in key parts of their budgets. According to Newsweek, even though there may be expectations for a larger COLA next year, research from the Senior Citizens League shows that Social Security benefits have already lost value, and a higher adjustment by itself may not deliver meaningful relief. In its Social Security's Loss of Buying Power 2026 report, the group estimates that benefits lost about 13.7% of their purchasing power between 2016 and 2026. Put another way, retirees are effectively receiving about 86 cents on the dollar compared with what their benefits could buy a decade earlier. The report also states that to restore the buying power retirees had in 2016, benefits would need to rise by 15.8%, or by $295.85 per month for the average beneficiary this year. Those numbers are important because they show that the issue is not only whether next year's COLA is higher or lower. The deeper problem is the accumulated gap between the official adjustment and the actual costs seniors have been absorbing over time. The Senior Citizens League also found that prices faced by seniors trying to shop as affordably as possible rose 43.55% over the past decade, while CPI-W increased by 37.60% during the same period. That comparison is central to the group's argument. Even when retirees bargain shop, compare prices, look across multiple grocery stores, and try to stretch every dollar, they can still be caught by broad price creep. Inflation does not affect only one aisle, one bill, or one category. It can show up across food, medical costs, housing expenses, insurance, and other essentials. And that makes it extremely difficult for seniors to fully avoid higher prices simply by changing how or where they shop. This is where the story shifts from a technical debate over index formulas to a practical question about monthly survival for retirees. If the formula used to calculate COLAs does not match the spending reality of older Americans, then the annual increase can look reasonable on paper while still leaving people behind in real life. That is why the Senior Citizens League is urging Congress to adjust the COLA formula so that it more accurately reflects the inflation seniors actually experience, rather than allowing buying power to continue slipping year after year. Under the current system, CPI-W is sometimes described as a blue-collar measure because it is based on urban wage earners and clerical workers, not specifically on retired Americans. The Senior Citizens League instead supports switching to CPI-E because CPI-E is built to reflect spending by people age 62 and older. The organization argues that CPI-E generally rises faster than CPI-W, because seniors spend a larger share of their income on healthcare and housing, two areas that can create heavy financial pressure in retirement. Based on TSCL's estimate, adopting CPI-E could add more than $12,000 in lifetime benefits for the average worker who stopped working and started claiming Social Security in 2024. At the same time, the group is calling for Congress to create a guaranteed minimum COLA of 3% each year. TSCL argues that multiple years of 0% COLAs after the 2008 financial crisis did serious harm to retirees' purchasing power. Social Security recipients received no increase in 2010, 2011, and 2016, even though there was continuing economic growth in some of those years. According to the report, a guaranteed minimum increase could gradually help benefits recover value, especially for retirees who live through repeated periods when official inflation is weak, but their own essential expenses continue to rise. What stands out is how much difference this could make in low inflation years. If the official inflation reading were only 1% or 2%, retirees would still receive a 3% increase under the proposed minimum. That would not solve every Social Security challenge, but it would create a baseline level of protection that the current formula does not provide. The larger concern is that Social Security itself faces pressure if lawmakers do not act more broadly. According to the argument presented, if Congress does not take action over the next 5 to 6 years to strengthen and improve the program, beneficiaries could face a broad benefit cut somewhere between 20% and 26%. For millions of retirees, a reduction of that size would not be a minor adjustment. It would be life-changing in a damaging way. This is why the discussion around CPI-W, CPI-E, And a 3% minimum COLA connects to a much larger question about the future of Social Security. The issue is not simply whether one index is slightly higher than another in a particular year. The real question is whether the program can keep benefits aligned with the actual costs retirees face, protect older Americans from losing ground over time, and avoid a future where promised benefits are cut sharply because reforms were delayed. The Senior Citizens League's position is clear. COLAs have not been keeping up, retirees have lost buying power, and Congress should update the formula so Social Security benefits better reflect senior inflation, while also considering a guaranteed minimum annual increase. For beneficiaries living on fixed incomes, even small differences in the formula can grow into significant lifetime dollars, and when the estimate reaches more than $12,000 in additional lifetime benefits, the policy choice becomes much more than a technical adjustment. It becomes a question of whether Social Security can continue doing what it was designed to do: help older Americans maintain financial stability as costs rise around them. The strongest part of the argument is that the official calculation can miss the lived experience of retirees. A person who is no longer commuting to work may not benefit much from an index that is heavily influenced by transportation or work-related clothing, while a person who is paying more for housing, insurance, prescriptions, and medical care may feel inflation more sharply than the current formula suggests. That is why a senior-focused measure like CPI-E has become such a central part of the proposal. It is not being presented as a perfect answer for every year, because there are years when CPI-W may be higher, especially when fuel costs rise. Instead, the idea is to stop locking retirees into one measure when another measure, or a reasonable minimum increase, could better protect them. The proposed higher of three approach is meant to capture that difference. Use CPI-W when it is stronger, use CPI-E when it better reflects senior costs, and use 3% when both indexes would leave retirees with too little of an increase.